Hi guys, it's Kelly here, and I am back for the third video for Stamping Bella this month. Today I am using Raven Loves Ribbon. She is one of their tiny townies, and I'm also using the die that matches that, and then I'm using the large falling heart stencil from Simon Says Stamp. So this is I just wanted to touch on this very quickly. This is not going to be a one layer card. Shocker, I know. But I did want to touch on this because I created the scene as if it could be a one layer card, and then I just chose not to do it that way. So here you can see I'm stamping them down, and even though I feel like my cling stamp went on straight, you can clearly see at the bottom she is standing on one foot. And then my sentiment is also crooked. So this is just like cheap copy paper. But this is something that really helps me in doing one layer cards or creating scenes. It does seem like, okay, well, you have to take these extra steps because they're cling stamps, but here I overcorrected. So now she's standing on just the other foot. But my sentiment's straight. So that's something. And they are maybe some extra steps. It doesn't really bother me to have to do it once or twice because I love clear stamps. You know I love clear stamps. But you will never get detail in clear stamps that you will get in rubber stamps. Ever. It isn't a thing. Not that they aren't beautiful or leave good impressions or any of those things. They do. But the detail that you can get in rubber stamping, there's a reason why it started there. So here, I did stamp her in Intense Blacking from Simon Says Stamp, in case I wanted to do any coat of coloring on the actual card base. But I stamped my sentiment in black Simon Says Stamp ink. And I totally love the sentiment. It says, "You are the sister I got to choose." Here I'm using some 3M Post-it note tape. I masked off the ground at the bottom because I knew I wanted to add shading underneath her. And then I'm also masking off my sentiment because I am using embossing paste. I know, weird one for me, right? Let me tell you what happened. So, part of a Facebook group that is card makers, and in there somebody had said, "What kind of embossing paste do you guys use?" And I was like, boom, I haven't used mine in like a year, so I don't really know. And then I was like, I haven't used it in a year? Like I paid for it, and it's just sitting on my desk being unused. So I decided to challenge myself a little bit since I have been doing one layer cards all month for Stamping Bella, to do something that was not a one layer card and had a little bit more texture. So I put all the texture in one card. Like, this is all I have to offer you. I used Distress Oxides for the background, and I did Salty Ocean, Picked Raspberry, and Squeezed Lemonade. FYI, totally loving the Squeezed Lemonade. But the reason that I did just those three colors for the ink blending in the background was because I knew they would mix together to give me secondary colors. So I knew that the Salty Ocean would mix with the Picked Raspberry and give me a little bit of a purple. Here, I'm working in a Ranger craft mat, and so I've just used basically the edge of my Distress Oxide stamp. This one is Salty Ocean. And then I'm going to pick up a little bit of the embossing paste, and I'm going to mix them together to color them. I personally only own white embossing paste because you can dye it with pretty much just whatever ink that you have. Now, if you are like a mixed media artist and you're using multiple colors on a piece all the time, or if you are using a large amount, I'm not. And so I can get away with just buying the white and then coloring it as I need it. So I will tell you that typically, because obviously you're mixing it with a lot of white, the embossing paste is white, that your colors are going to be a little bit softer, a little bit more muted, but I kind of like that look. So anyway, I'm cleaning off my, what kind of palette knife is this? I don't even remember. I think it's from Tonic. I'll link it. I'll link everything. You guys know that by now. I'm just, picking that up, and I'm not like smushing it down so that it's smooth. I'm leaving it kind of pooled on top of that because I don't want it to dry too fast on me. Here is the Wilted Violet, which I gotta tell you, there wasn't really a noticeable difference for me between the Picked Raspberry and the Wilted Violet. But I didn't know that going into it, and so it's fine that they're both on there. No biggie. They are, like I said, more muted. The one that got me, though, okay, this is the carved pumpkin. I started to mix the entire thing together, and then I actually had to like scoop it out of the color and move it over a little bit because the color was so intense. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. Now that I have all my colors on there, I am going to start kind of scraping them off. And the reason that I wanted to be able to do like the entire scraping all at one time was so that the colors would kind of mix together. I got a little bit too much mixing toward the bottom, and I lost a little bit of my blue. But it's okay. I just picked up more blue and went back in there, and it'll sit right on top of it, and you'll be able to see the blue, and it's no big. I'm going to go ahead and remove the stencil, and then I loved the way it came out. Bam, multicolored hearts. Makes me happy. But here's the problem that I had. So I covered up the sentiment because I didn't want the embossing paste over the sentiment. And one of the hearts, the one in like the top right to the top right of yeah, I know, was so close to it that it didn't completely create the heart because it was on that masking. So I did have to go in and kind of line it up a little bit. Another thing to note is next to the sister, I did get like a little bit of a yellow pinkish color. Here I'm just showing you how easy this cleans up. This is just a wet baby wipe on my Ranger craft mat, and I just rubbed it around even though it was completely dry. So now that this is dry on here, that little one next to the sister, I was able to go in with a sanding eraser and completely remove the texture, but I could not remove the pigment. And that's just, it was what it was. I couldn't get the pigment up. So I'm going to mask that later on, but I just wanted to let you know all of the steps that I took. I stamped Raven again. And I did not say, I am using Nina 80-pound solar white cardstock. I stamped her again in the Intense Black ink from Simon Says Stamp because we're going to be doing some Copic coloring, and then that is what we're doing here. I chose a color combination for her skin, which is like my typical go-to. The reason that I decided not to do something different, and I did kind of toy around with how I wanted to do this before that person asked about the embossing paste, and I was like, oh, challenge accepted. Because I'm going to mail this card. And so there's basically a couple of women in my life who this sentiment would totally apply to. The first one is I have lived in the same city my whole life. And when we moved into my parents still live in that house. When we moved into that house, there was a family next door who had a daughter the same age. Her name is Amy. Amy has literally been my best friend my entire life. We've lived next door to each other. We have gone through pretty much everything. Breakups, back-togethers, high school, nearly failings, summer school, yep, that happened, graduation, college, kids, marriages. Like, literally, she has been a part of my life since I was, like, 1 year old. So we jokingly refer to her in my household as my parents' fourth daughter, because my parents have 3 girls, and Amy's the fourth daughter. And like to this day, she still helps out my parents. You watched the video with my talking about my mom, then you know my grandmother has dementia. And Amy, because I have such a crazy schedule, my sisters also have crazy schedules, has Saturday nights open, and Saturday nights my parents like to bowl. And so she goes over to my mom and dad's house and quote unquote babysits my grandmother so my parents can go bowl. So like, it's just so funny how God puts these people in your life. And even though, Amy isn't my sister per se, she is in every other sense of the world exactly what a sister is, and I just adore her. She's one of the best people I know. So anyway, I also have other like crafty friends that would definitely apply to, that I could mail this card to. I would not be able Amy, this card is like the exact opposite of Amy. Amy is so, like, where I'm, I guess, more of like a quote unquote girly girl. Like, I like to do my hair and makeup and whatever. Amy is not even about any of that. In fact, when I got married, I wanted her to be a bridesmaid, and that required her to put on a dress. And I was really nervous about asking her because I was like, I don't know if she'll want to put on a dress and then let a bunch of people look at her. And I was like, you don't have to wear makeup. You don't have to do anything that you want to do. Like, I just want you to be in my wedding because you're like my fourth sister. And she was totally awesome. She was like, Kelly, like, I'll do like whatever you need me to do. You need me to wear a dress? I'll wear a dress. You need me to put on some makeup? I'll put on some makeup. Like, whatever you need me to do. And she was just awesome. And so I just let her do whatever she wanted to do, whatever she was comfortable with. Anywho, let's actually talk about this coloring since that's what I'm doing, right? So for her hair, first of all, the shading that I did with her face is most of it, like on the inside of her legs is going to be darker. And then the way her head is tilted down, her bangs are coming over the left-hand side of her face. So it's going to leave the right-hand side of her face lighter, not just because her hair is not in it, but also because of the way her head is tilted. So for her hair, it's kind of going to be the same way where that highlight is going to catch on the lack of hair that is over her face. She has these cute, like short little curly pigtails, which are totally adorable. And for those, you don't really need to do anything specific as long as you have some highlights and some lowlights in there. For the flat part of her hair, you're probably going to want to do some flicking. So just very light flicking with just the tip of your marker. But for the curly part, it's a little less important because there is so much texture going on there. Her dress. Let's talk about these folds, folks. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my lightest color. I always start with my lightest and work out to my darkest. And here what I'm doing, and I am taking my sweet time about it, because there are a lot of folds in this dress, which is beautiful, and I'm a little bit jealous. But so basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in with my lightest color and I'm going to map out where I want my darkest areas to be. This does take like a little bit of time in the beginning, but it's completely worth it because then you don't have to think about it for the rest of the colors. Like you literally don't have to think about it. You just put the colors where you've already put the color. Okay, so when you're looking at folds, typically, if something is raised up, it's going to catch more light. If it is inset, it's going to have more shadows. So as I'm going through this, and I'm using the same color, and just for her top, because she's holding that ribbon in front of her, that's going to make those areas darker. Her one arm is up, so that'll make the shoulder darker, and then the ribbon is in front of her chest, so that is also going to be darker. Anyway, back to these folds. So you have something called cast shadows, which is basically anytime an object lays on top of another object, you're going to have a shadow. So that's what I'm doing with the ribbon because it's in front of the dress. That's why I'm just adding those pretty much 2 lines directly next to it. For the rest of the folds or ruffles, some of them have very hard lines, meaning that there's a line drawn in there. It's very apparent that one part is raised. Some of them, it's more like implied. So the part on right above her right leg, there isn't a line there, but it is kind of with the drawing, it is implied that there would be a ruffle there. So that is why I decided to put a shadow there. There was an indentation in the bottom of her skirt that would indicate a ruffle. That's how I decided to shade it. For the parts that are laying on top of each other, so there's like tiers, like 3 tiers of ruffles to her skirt. Underneath those, some of the ruffles are kind of raised. It will be darker closest to the top edge. And then there'll be more light that is let in as the ruffle kind of falls down to the rest of the dress. Oh, I'm also adding a little bit of shading in her it's her right, my left, our left, in her armpit. I'm just adding just a little bit of line of shading there. For the darkest color, I'm doing the same thing. I'm not necessarily always carrying the line as high up as I have been, or I should say as low as I have been. So like as it comes down from the darkest part, which is where one tier meets another, I'm sometimes just doing like a flick of color and I'm not completely connecting that dark line all the way to the bottom of her skirt. There isn't anything wrong with doing that. I just sometimes like the result better by not completely connecting it and allowing there to be some color breaks. Right now, this is looking like a crazy hot mess. Oh, and this whole time, like I've been shading her shoes. For the shading of her shoes, you just want the toe of her shoes to be a little bit lighter. Other than that, go crazy. So now that I have all the colors laid out, I've worked all the way to my darkest color. When I come back in with my lighter colors, I am going to do that little bit of flicking motion, and I'm going to flick towards the lightest area. I don't want to completely cover that. I want my lightest color to be, in fact, the lightest color. But I do want there to be some transition shades. So I'm going to add a little bit of shading right over that darker area and carry the color out just a little bit. I am even doing this on the points that are the highlights, because your highlighted fabric is not going to be just the lightest color. It is also going to have some shading. So a good rule of thumb is to add a little bit of shading to the left and to the right of your darkest lines. You don't want to completely cover it. You still totally want to keep a highlight, but it doesn't have to be a lot. You need an area that has some highlight so you get that depth. And again, at this point, we're still looking not great. With the shading, it looks a little weird. For this particular type of coloring, the magic happens. I promise you, stick with it. The magic happens with the lightest color. Once you go in there with the lightest color and just kind of go over everything once, which will encourage blending as well, that is when you can really start to see the layers kind of pop forward. Everything makes sense. You can see very distinctly all of the tiers. But it's not over blended. And typically I don't do this, but I wanted you to see how dark those dark lines are. Because when you're looking at it from far away, you're like, okay, yeah, all those little ruffles, there's dimension, it's great. Up close, there are still a lot of very distinct dark lines that are not necessarily blended out. And I wanted you to be able to see that my coloring looks like that too. When I first started Copic coloring, I had a really hard time with not feeling like my colors blended. I would see other people's YouTube videos or final photos of their coloring and be like, hers are so blended. Why don't mine look like that? Well, mine did look like that, but hers or his or whoever's I was looking at, it wasn't a close-up. It wasn't something you were looking at in real life. And so when I met other people in real life and saw their Copic coloring, people that I, respected and admired their Copic coloring, like, Sandy Allnock and Christina Warner and people that I met in real life and saw their work product in my hand in real life, I realized that it just looks that way on screen. In real life, not all those colors are perfectly blended. So moving on to the ribbon. Here, you're going to have some shading. Again, we're working with the highlights and the lowlights, and that's what's going to give you dimension. So the way that this ribbon is folding over, there's definitely going to be shading there. One of the things that I like to do is I like to kind of just draw a very light line, a very thin line, next to the areas I'm going to be flicking from. Because I find if I have that line, I'm a little less nervous about putting the marker down. If I'm just going in with the tip of my marker doing the light flicking motions and I don't have like a line to anchor myself, my edges are uneven, I guess is the best way I can put it, is I'm not always putting my marker down in the same place. But if I already have that line in there, it makes me more comfortable to just go ahead and put my marker down and start the flicking. So with the ribbon, the high points or the highlights are going to be any place where the ribbon kind of swoops towards you or swoops out. So the highlight is going to be like where it's crossing over the ribbon in front of her, where the left-hand side's coming over the right. That is a swoop. Where the right-hand side comes down by her leg and it's very full and kind of billowy, that's going to be a highlight. Up at the top where it's rounded, those are both going to be highlights. Her hair and her hand, where she's, like grabbing the ribbon, that is going to have some shading as well. Where, again, we're talking about those cast shadows, where one part of the ribbon lays across another part of the ribbon, more shadows. And so these are just things that you can kind of train your mind to start looking for when you are doing coloring. So even if you start out and you only put in the cast shadows, Okay, that's great because it was maybe more shadows than you had before. And then once you get comfortable with the cast shadows, maybe you could start, practicing that flicking where it's not just a line of shadows, you're getting, moving forward into that blending. For the darkest color, I'm basically going to do the same thing. I'm never completely covering up all of the colors previous to that. I did not, so the way on the right hand side, the way this ribbon comes up, it almost like turns on itself to create the heart. I only added the darkest shading on the inside. So on the inside of the heart on the left hand side, because I wanted there to be some delineation where that turn is. So once I've worked all the way out to the darkest color, again, this is the easy part, is going back in and just starting to fill in those areas with the same colors that I've already been using. So from the lightest out to the darkest, darkest back into the lightest. And then there's a little like curl on the end of the ribbon. I did try to leave that a little bit lighter. Sometimes it can be very difficult when you're doing a bunch of shading behind something so tiny. If you happen to get dark ink on, like something like that, don't sweat it. Just go in with the colorless blender or with your lightest color. Like the B00 would be light enough to kind of pick that up. So don't sweat it. If you are really looking for something that's a strong highlight, you can also use like a white gel pen. So all the way out to the lightest color, like I said, I'm not taking the lightest color all over everything. I am more just leaving it in the white areas because Copics are transparent. Lighter colors will pick up darker colors, and I don't want to lose any of the dark shading that I've already achieved here. So I'm really just kind of paying attention to where that lightest color needs to go without removing any of the dark. I did want to, and I don't know what was up with the autofocus on my camera, so my apologies. I went back in with the lightest color and just colored in the trim on her dress and on her little cap sleeve, which is totally adorable. I did go in and outline this image. I like a bolder black line. This is something that I do often. Stamping Bella images are typically very detailed. I would not do this unless you are extremely comfortable with outlining. I would skip that part. Just that's my FYI on that. Here, because I didn't look at my dies, I didn't look at the die, I thought that the center heart piece was going to be part of my die cut. And so I wanted to make my background match. It turns out it totally cuts it out, and I should have paid better attention. But I just wanted to show you, because in the final card, there is some color on the die cut because I did this part. So I didn't want you to be confused about where that came from. So you can see here as I'm putting the die down, like clearly it's going to cut out the center of the heart, Kelly. Like, pay attention. So I did line that up, and I'm going to go ahead and run it through my Big Shot. I'm just going to pop that out here, and I was actually really happy with like the color combination and the way things came out. I was a little nervous in the beginning with like the blue and purple, but I think it came out great. I love how that blue pops against the yellow. This is the reason why I masked off the embossing paste to begin with, is because I knew I was going to want to add shading to where she was standing, so she didn't just look like she was floating in thin air. So I'm using my cool grays to do that. You'll notice the C5 is back because I went to the store and bought another one. So I texted my girlfriend, Weeda, and I was like, my gift to you, keep the C5. I bought another one already. Because like I said, I only see her every 6 months, and I can't go 6 months without a C5. That's lunacy. I use the cool grays pretty much for everything that I make. So I went through and did it once. I wasn't really happy with the way that it worked out. And so if at first you don't succeed, dust yourself off and try again. That's a song by Aaliyah, by the way, in case you don't listen to music from the 2000s. So here I've put a ridiculous amount of Scotch foam tape on the back of my die cut. A little tip on the round areas. If you just use smaller straight pieces, you can usually get them around there without too much of an issue. I'm just going to peel all of that off, and then that's the reason why I stamped it down, so that it would be easier for me to just line it up with all the colors I had going on. Could just line it up, push it down, and be good to go. Now let's talk about, let's talk about glitter. I clear Wink Estella'd the daylights out of this ribbon. And then I went in and I was trying to cover up. Remember how we talked about that embossing paste that had color that got where I didn't want it? So I put them around the sentiment. And then I kind of just liked the way all of the, like, the shimmer and the glitter looked. So I ended up putting just a couple of clear sequins throughout the entire card, like they were falling down with the hearts, and really loved that and thought it was fun. So if you would like to see something for my final video for the Stamping Bella guest designer this month, please leave me a comment below and let me know. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.